from the Salvation Army National Headquarters, this is the Fight for Good podcast.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Fight for Good podcast. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Tim Foley. We're broadcasting here at National Headquarters of the Salvation Army in the United States of America in Alexandria, Virginia. We're in our temporary offices, actually studio, if you want to call it. It's the office of our producer, Elizabeth. How are you today, Elizabeth?
Oh, I'm so super lovely.
Super lovely always. Michelle, how are you today?
I'm good.
You're good? Yep. Just good?
Just
or
good.
Super fantastic?
Super good.
Our editorial director, Mr. McDonald, Jeff.
Greetings in the name of our Lord in the year 2020.
2020. Now, have you ever written 2019 in 2020?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
You probably still use your checkbook when you go to the grocery store, don't you, sir?
Embarrassingly, I do sometimes use a checkbook. Check.
And Michelle, you
I know what a check is.
Hey, all right.
she knows what a check is. Elizabeth?
I know how to cash a check.
You know how to
I don't have a checkbook.
I know how to mobile deposit.
Yes, the mobile deposit.
That came out so I got my checkbook, my checking account and all that when I was pretty young actually. And then mobile depositing came out and I was like, this is amazing. I never have to talk to people ever again.
It's a game changer.
Yeah.
I just learned
Exactly.
last year how to do mobile deposit.
Wow.
It's just so amazing.
Life
phenomenal.
changing.
But you don't have to talk to anybody anymore. You realize that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I travel, you can just do everything wirelessly. I mean, I don't even need a hotel key. I can just put my phone up and it lets me in the door. Do you know that? Have you ever had that
No,
experience?
I didn't do that yet.
Yeah, you rent a car, you don't have to talk to anybody, It's good.
It's taking anime to a whole nother level.
That's right.
Yeah.
In a bad way, though.
Right.
We still need each other.
Yes.
And in the new decade, we're in a new decade, 2020. Think about it for a second. Where were you 10 years ago at this time? 10 years ago. You would have probably not heard us at all. That's my guess. 10 years ago, Elizabeth, where were you?
I was tearing up the 8th grade. I was prepping to try out for cheerleading for high school.
Okay. All right.
I was rocking in my Mustang blue.
I had a Mustang too.
Really?
Wait, you were in 8th grade.
Wait, no, I mean my school's mascot was a Mustang.
I was wait,
not
'cause
driving.
I was getting my driver's license.
Oh, no.
In my Mustang.
You had a Mustang.
Yes, I still have one.
Wait,
Oh,
really?
Really?
Wow.
That's awesome. And 10 years ago,
I was hustling between colleges with my children.
You had, for a second there, I was like, you were hustling between colleges. Like, you were like a young man 10 years ago.
Oh, me.
Yeah.
Right. No, hardly. No, my children were, my grown-up kids were in college, and we were, visiting campuses and all that.
Oh, yeah, doing the
Checking them out and going to their
college
activities.
shuffle.
And, yeah.
Yeah.
Great times.
Well, I'm trying to think. This is the last decade of my active officership. I mean, I still have 6 years to go, but I think 10 years from now, what will I be doing? This will be all a distant memory, and I'm sure the digital world will have changed, and who knows what goes on with podcasts at that point in time. But it's kind of interesting to kind of think about what's ahead, but the stuff that you can't really control. But like you were saying earlier, Jeff, talking about living in the minute and in the moment.
In the moment, yeah.
Making the space. I think in 2019, probably what had the biggest impact on me was all of the stuff we did in leading up to Mr. Rogers, with the Mr. Rogers pieces that we had, and with Amy Hollingsworth and Joanne, and watching the movies, and I'm actually working on something right now for a chapel here. Just talking about the little flashing light on Mr. Rogers. Did you ever notice that in Mr. Rogers? There's a little flashing light at the beginning of the show. It's a traffic light, and basically it starts with that to say, you know what, caution, slow down a little bit. So, I'm hoping this year that I'll get that whole book that I've been writing about slowing down and getting that getting that to
That
press.
whole study, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, when you think about the future, what you'll be doing in 10 years, that can be somewhat anxiety-provoking in that we don't know what the future holds. And that anxiety can chafe at us. What should we be doing? What should we become? Am I doing the right thing? And I think that's where faith can speak into that.
Well, that's the one thing that we're trying to keep pulse on with our publications, whether it's our digital side, the magazines, Peer Magazine and the War Cry, is those things that are causing people to fear. And we address that in January's issue a little bit. You want to talk about that?
We certainly do. In your article, you acknowledge that there's things we can control, but certainly we're not sure of who is in control in the end. And you have a quote here. The God we worship is the God who is the Creator King, who rules over his creation. He owns this earth. He owns everything in it. He has made it habitable for us to enjoy.
It was interesting. I spent some time with my grandson over the holidays, and he's 3 years old, and he was singing the little song to Chicken Little. And I said, oh, you know what? We kind of have an article about Chicken Little. And I think sometimes our fears are not to minimize those fears, but the curse of anxiety in our time right now is that it's literally killing people. The suicide rate with the young folks is young people.
Right. And also in the military, it's on the rise.
Yeah.
And other segments.
So I think we're trying to address those kind of things like, anxiety, and we're focusing on functional things. This is what I like of what we're able to do now with both in the printed version and on the digital side, is that we're able to kind of move pretty quickly to address some of these practical things. We've in past issues just recently, we've talked a little bit about money matters and relationships and the use of time and I know Michele, you've been kind of tracking some of that stuff and you're working well ahead on with some of the vloggers and the YouTubers and the influencers. What are some of the trends that you're seeing as we go into 2020? Some of the concerns that are coming out of some of the arenas that you're reading and dwelling and reading about?
I see that like a reoccurring thing with everyone I interview is about being like authentic, especially because I do interview a lot of influencers, and their number one advice is like, whether you want to be an influencer, YouTuber, whatever you want to call it, or you're just kind of living your normal day-to-day life, the one thing is to like be yourself and don't put up this like facade on social media, because it'll come back and just kind of like, what is it, like blow up in your face, because like you're putting out there that like you're so happy and this is so perfect, and like, but that's not true. Like your online life is like kind of a sham. But if you're genuinely happy, then you'll share genuine happy moments online. And when you're not feeling genuinely happy, you don't need to like share. Like you need to deal with that personally, because it's like a double-edged sword. Like share the good moments, but then people like kind of call you out on only sharing the good moments. But then when you complain or put your life issues out there on like Facebook, everyone's like rolls their eyes and they're like, why are you like putting that out there? So it's about like trying to find that balance of like dealing with your own stuff and then also being able to share like online, but all while being true to yourself.
Before we get back to the conversation with Colonel Foley, I just want to take a moment to talk about Peer Magazine. Peer is a Salvation Army youth publication for 16 to 22-year-olds. By addressing topics related to faith, community, and culture, Peer ignites a conversation that deepens biblical perspective, faith, and holy living. Peer is a monthly magazine that comes directly to your mailbox for free almost every month. Just visit peermag.org to subscribe. Again, that's peermag.org.
A tradition that the Salvation Army continues, and they have been marching. The Salvation Army has been marching in the Tournament of Roses Parade in Pasadena, California for, what was it, over 100 years?
Yeah.
Right? 101 years?
I think so.
Yeah, pretty amazing. We had the area here in the DMV, the DC area, the National Capital Band and the National Capital Youth Band joined with forces from Southern California's music groups out there to march in the Rose Parade. I had the privilege, fun fact.
Ooh.
I had the fun privilege. I've marched in that parade 3 times. Are you proud of me?
That's an awesome parade.
It is. It's actually really cool to watch in person, but also to march in it. It's a lot of work. Elizabeth, it's a lot of work for me to keep that E-flat flag I carried.
You're a
3
legend.
times.
You're legendary out
Keep
there.
it in tune.
Flag bearer master.
That was it. That was a fun thing, and I bring that up because I noticed that got a lot of traction.
Yeah.
We had you put a little thing on
Mm-hmm.
our website about it, and tell us a little bit about that.
This was Trivia Tuesday, and we just gave a little bit of history about how it's been marching in the parade since the 1920s with a picture, and people loved it.
It went crazy.
Over 7,000 people saw it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So either people really like it, or maybe they just didn't have anything to do.
Right. They wanted to fill up their feed.
That's great. Well, thanks, Elizabeth, for putting that up. And thank you, everybody, for your liking of that. And we appreciate your feedback. If there are other things that are going on, unique things that the Salvation Army is doing annually throughout the year in your communities all over, we'd like to hear about those, and we'd like to promote and give you a shout out as well about that. Well, Jeff, let's just talk really briefly. We mentioned a little bit about one of the articles in the January issue. We have a few more features in the issue. We had the general of the Salvation Army had an interesting encounter with the head of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis, and we had a great picture of both the Pope and the general on the cover of the War Cry. Is there anything you wanted to point out on that particular article to our readers?
Well, the Army has maintained a dialogue with the Catholic Church over the decades, and certainly the Catholic Church and the Salvation Army share basic mission principles, as well as a view of salvation that is compatible. And that dialogue has actually produced a book in 2007 called Conversations with the Catholic Church. A record of the paper is presented during a dialogue between the Church and the Salvation Army at Sunbury Court in the UK. Part of that book reads, "We confess together that all persons depend completely on the saving grace of God for their salvation. The freedom they possess in relation to persons and the things of this world is no freedom in relation to salvation. For as sinners they stand under God's judgment and are incapable of turning by themselves to God to seek deliverance, of meriting their justification before God, or of obtaining salvation by their own abilities. Justification takes place solely by God's grace." The author of that, I believe, is Dr. David Crawford. So that's just an interesting sidelight, but they had a very warm reception at the Vatican.
What's the title of that book again?
Conversations with the Catholic Church.
Do you know if it's still in print? We didn't publish that.
No,
book.
that's out
It
of
comes from
London, out of the
international.
UK
Yeah,
Army. Yeah. So it's possible that the supplies departments do have copies.
Yeah. And the Pope, in his conversations with the general, commended the Salvation Army for helping the individuals, the marginalized individuals in the world. And in particular, he noted what the Salvation Army is doing there in Rome. And then in particular, what the Salvation Army is doing with human trafficking. We have an article in this issue on human trafficking as well. The Salvation Army is very involved in trying to curb the tide of the trafficking movement. Was there anything?
It's interesting that the Army helped 3,000 individuals caught in trafficking by providing them support services and a way out in last year.
We also want to emphasize we did a little feature of this a while ago when I was out in Omaha, Nebraska, and we talked with the farmer that was out there, and we did a nice little podcast, and I think that was kind of fun. But we have an article about the floods in Iowa and how the Salvation Army is continuing its service there. And I think the point that we wanted to make, both in that and in any upcoming things, is that the Salvation Army, when it comes to these natural disasters, we're there when they happen, and we're there in the transitioning. I mean, there's a lot to it.
There is, and your article captures, that intangible nature of Salvation Army ministry, in that it's a ministry of presence and relationship. We talked earlier about the enemy that technology can create in one-sided conversations and divisiveness and isolation. But here the Army is interacting with these great people who saw their farm so devastated by those floods, and how the Army just came alongside them and was a friend and offered hope.
And that leads me to a portion in January's issue. I really want to call this out to the attention of our Salvationist listeners and readers, that we have a message from the General of the Salvation Army. It's a 2-page issue where he basically is giving us a call to mission and reminding us once again of our purpose and what it is that we're about. He encouraged us to really, it was on kind of on a threefold thing: be ready, be engaged, and take responsibility. I really enjoyed this piece and personally, having the opportunity a couple months ago to meet the General. He's a very, very personable and warm individual who loves the Lord and loves the Salvation Army, and carries a heavy burden for the Salvation Army internationally. What was there anything in the General's call to mission that kind of stuck out?
So much. There's so much there. And you talk about the new year and what we look forward to in the coming year and decade. This issue, kind of captures tries to boil down what's essential. And I think in our work, we try to be innovative. We're trying to move forward. We're trying to provide good content. But the General, there's a quote in here from his work that says, "We are not alone in this battle. We stand on the shoulders of those giants who have gone before us. Through their legacy, we have proof of God's faithfulness and the ability to see further. And of course, God himself goes before us." So that is something to keep in mind, certainly, as we enter a new year.
Well, we also have, what would you call this? It's like in the middle, it's like in the quotes and kind of...
A call out.
A call out. But basically it says, the General said, people can be released from everything that stops them from reaching their God-given potential. I really believe that. I have experienced that, like in this last year, after getting a particular medical diagnosis. And basically the doctor told me, you know what, you can change this, but you're going to have to do something about it. And you're going to have to take XYZ kind of steps. And it wasn't like a magic pill that I could just swallow. I think the General's word here to us in the Salvation Army is, we can sit around and talk about the problem, and we can be perplexed, or we can feel defeated, or we can blame this or blame that. Really what it means for what the General's, he's really calling us out, saying, you know what, you can make a difference in your life. And certainly we can make more of a difference in the world when we're regenerated and reborn again by the Holy Spirit and filled by the Holy Spirit. Have this perfect love that casts out all fear, and give us the unction to kind of go forward.
On that theme of responding to the General's call to mission, the War Cry, we get so many cards returned to us asking for follow-up, more information, saying people receive Christ through reading the War Cry. They want to know how they can receive Christ. And that's kind of our lifeblood. We share that with the territories, and then the territories follow up on the field level with those inquiries. But it's just a real privilege to get that kind of response and to be able to follow up when people request prayer or assistance.
And we get those notifications, and try to get that information back to the territories and
which we're doing electronically now, but before we were doing it by mail.
Yeah.
So it's much more efficient.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of little changes we hope to keep making.
That's a little behind the scenes of our day-to-day operations here.
Yeah.
And one last thing from you, Jeff. What are you kind of looking down the road as we go through 2020? What are some of the things on your mind that we will be exploring in our publications?
I think certainly we want to deal more with media, movies, etc., and provide more in-depth critique, announcement, and analysis of those themes that are in the public eye. Of course, we did publish our theme list in our January issue, and we are anxious to get submissions from readers on those themes so for possible publication.
So, Elizabeth, tell our listeners how they could go about submitting something to the War Cry.
Just go to thewarcry.org and go to contribute.
Contribute.
Good.
Well, it's coming together. This is our 12th or 13th episode that we've done.
13.
We're trying to streamline it a little bit, keep it under 30 minutes
Love
or thereabouts. We give Elizabeth a challenge to do with that. We appreciate everyone that takes a few moments to download and listen, give a listen to our podcast. And if you leave feedback, it even helps us a little better. We appreciate all that the Salvation Army has done this past holiday season. We know several of our listeners and readers have worked very hard in bringing a lot of joy and comfort to many people throughout the United States. We're grateful for our donors and people that continue to believe in the Salvation Army and believe that their communities are made better because of what the fight for good is taking place in those communities. And our job here is to tell those stories. And so send us your stories, send us your feedback, and we love to hear from you. Well, this is going to end another episode of the Fight for Good podcast. Thank you for taking the time to listen. Be sure to subscribe to Fight for Good wherever you listen to your podcasts. And don't forget to follow us on Follow the War Cry and Peer Magazine on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest. Until next time, this has been the Fight for Good podcast. Have a great, happy, and wonderful New Year. God bless you.
Subscribe to Fight for Good wherever you listen to podcasts.